Okay. Thank you very much as well, Dawn, for inviting me here tonight. This is an incredibly expert-looking room, and it was really nice to see those statistics because there's a little bit of optimism around those statistics because it really seems like Nock Deighton are probably a one-stop shop for anything landlords need at this point. And a lot of mine's a little bit miserable, which is terrible, isn't it? So luckily you've got all the really exciting speakers afterwards, particularly auction purchases. I was just talking about that earlier. Like still with my first auction purchase, I actually looked down because my heart was beating so hard. I thought it must be visible. So you've got exciting, happy things ahead. And I'm afraid I'm a little bit miserable. So I need to caveat that by perhaps talking about the fact that sort of 80%, it's in the 80s, and it changes every year a little bit, but roughly 80% of tenants are really happy with their properties, really happy with their landlord, paying their rent, and clearly, that's a great ratio, 80%, nice if it's a little bit higher, and quite often we're focused on that smaller percentage who we worry about, who sometimes make our life a misery. I should probably say where I'm from. From the NRLA. And we are a not-for-profit organisation that essentially tries very hard to be a bit of a one-stop shop for landlords, essentially. So all the documents you need, all the advice, and then an awful lot of campaigning and lobbying, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit now for you. I'm also going to do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour on some of the legislation that's changed or you need to be aware of. And that legislation is part of the 168 pieces, I think it is, we have to adhere to, so it's no wonder it's really tricky being a landlord. And I don't think it's been a trickier time ever, quite frankly. There's so much that we're facing that makes it really, really difficult. And so it can feel quite lonely being a landlord, which is why it's really important to perhaps come along to these things and be able to reach out to people like Dawn or any kind of support, really. So within the NRLA, our key thing is about supporting the PRS, so private residential landlords, that's where we're working, campaigning, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we're campaigning because it's starting to become quite effective, and then ensuring that we're providing all the information, guidance and support and tools that you need. So we've got over 100,000 members, which sounds quite good. It makes us the largest landlord body and it means that the government is starting to listen to us. I sit, for example, in a government panel in Wales because Wales is a bit smaller, so they'll talk to me. In England, it's our CEO who talks to number 10, Michael Gove in particular, and is in the room where things are happening and campaigning on our behalf. Our Trustpilot scores are really high. We had a 1-star this week. It's a brilliant 1-star. It's from a tenant, a really unhappy tenant, because we gave such good advice to the landlord, they got rid of this really difficult tenant. There's some good news for you. We have an advice line. I think that's a really important opportunity for people to reach out when they're really struggling or stuck or have any questions whatsoever about those 168 pieces of legislation that we struggle with, and keeping on top of it is really difficult in all the roles that we have to play. Lots of documents, guides and meetings as well. So all of those things are really what we do, if you haven't heard of us before. So, the rental reform paper, which I've been talking to people outside, and this is one of those things that's unnerving landlords in general. And it was announced in 2018 through Theresa government. We keep coming back to this idea. They've been very clear that they're going to abolish Section 21, which is that no-fault eviction opportunity that landlords, as a landlord, we like to be able to serve that Section 21. It makes it nice and easy. Do no-fault eviction for the tenant as well, so it's much better for them. But they've always been very clear that that's going. And there's an awful lot of anti-landlord rhetoric around all of this. It was about being fairer to tenants, making renting a far more positive experience, as if 80-odd% of them weren't positive already. So when the white paper did finally appear, this is pretty much what it's saying. These 5 key points of safe and decent homes. I don't think anybody has an issue with renting a safe and decent home. I don't think Dawn would let you not rent a safe and decent home. And I think anybody coming to events like this would dream of not renting a safe and decent home. So it has very little impact on us as landlords. It's really about trying to level out how it works between social landlords and the PRS. And so there's some niggly, issuey bits there that would need some clarity for us. For example, I think social landlords have to change kitchens and bathrooms at certain intervals, and it's the definitions of what's fit, etc. So, not really a big issue for us. I think what is the big issue for us is that abolishment of Section 21 and Schedule 2 grounds. So Schedule 2 grounds are all the reasons why you might need to and want to regain possession of your house. And actually, they're tricky and they're costly and they're time consuming, and naturally we'd be very concerned about having to use any of those rather than being able to use a Section 21. So it's one of the things that we're doing, and I've talked about the campaigning a little bit already, is we do an awful lot of research with various research bodies, so we're very, very data rich, and we end up writing kind of shadow papers essentially, and take those to these meetings and share those with policymakers and government that suggest what would work in a very balanced way so that we're listened to. So for example, if we were looking at the ground for wanting to take back your house because you want to live in it, or a family member wants to live in it, that's looking quite difficult, it's a little bit woolly, it's unclear, and so within our conversations, the idea there is, well actually, if there's a letter from a solicitor saying that they're selling the property, that should be sufficient, shouldn't it? So it's that kind of balanced, clear, very clear, accessible argument for policymakers who don't really understand what it's like on the ground to be a landlord. One of the other things they can see is this idea of an open-ended tenancy. So I think Michael Gove is very committed to this as well, said that tenants don't understand the difference between periodic and fixed. I don't think that's true. Nevertheless, that's what they've announced, is let's get rid of fixed tenancies, that's just all periodic, so they can give notice a little bit earlier, etc., etc. And that becomes problematic, of course, if you've got a student let, because you want to be sure that you've got possession of your house back in the summer for your next set of students. There's all sorts of problems that I think sometimes policymakers don't really get in practice, and that's some of the issues there. So they're talking about improved dispute resolution. Again, talking to people, we know that works, but we've really got to have some confidence that the court system's going to work. That would need really major reform. There's talk about property portal, so having licensed properties. So one of the things I do in my role is I work with lots of local authorities and liaise with them, and some of them will say, Sandra, I don't know who the criminal landlords are. If I knew who the criminal landlords are, we'd go after them. And we don't know, which we can't believe, but that's the case. And equally, they want to do things, and they've got plenty of enforcement powers, they just don't have the resource. So again, we're looking at talking to the government and policymakers about how that works. And the other thing that was there was that positive renting experience, so no blanket bans. It doesn't mean, as tenants like to tell us, that you absolutely can't say no pets, because clearly some properties aren't suitable for pets. So that was in the white paper, essentially. After that was announced, that's pretty much the reaction that our research showed. People are like, oh, this is going to be impossible to work with. I'm going to be really nervous about letting to particular tenant demographics, because if I can't get possession of my property back, if there's any ASB or rental arrears. And so there was a real wobble around that. And obviously that has an issue in a number of ways. We can already see that supply is a huge issue across the country, huge, so that actually, for example, I was letting a property just across the road in Hollinswood earlier, about this time last year, 68 applicants in 24 hours, and all the ones that were shortlisted, almost all of them were moving because their landlord was selling. So clearly there has been a reaction to this white paper, along with a number of other concerns that landlords have. And we're seeing higher rents, as Dawn's just said, or people shifting to perhaps short-term lets, and the government have just announced a consultation on that as well. So, I mean, that's not really the only reason that we're seeing landlords losing confidence and exiting the market. We know that since Liz Truss's fun little budget in October, that's really had an impact, and mortgage rates have gone up, and I'm hearing from landlords all the time about coming out of a fixed rate, and actually they've not put the rents up for ages, because the statistics we're seeing about rents are quite often about rents for properties that are new to the market as opposed to rents within tenancies. So actually, if you've not put your rent up for a little while, if you're managing yourself, and good letting agents tend to manage that effectively for you, and you come out of a fixed term, your mortgage is suddenly sky high, that difference, putting that rent up, is a really tricky aspect. Tax, and again, I think there's some accountancy and tax talks later, which is really critical. That's something that's really biting landlords. And the other thing about being part of the NLA, so sometimes on a Sunday or midweek I'll get a call from Radio 4, it'll be World at One or Johnny Diamond on whatever the Sunday programme is, and they want to talk to me about what's landlord reactions to a certain bit of news. Every single time I'm getting in this impact of Section 24 tax and how punitive tax is on landlords when we're taxed on turnover. And that's another reason why we're exiting the market and why the cost of living bites landlords just as much as it's biting everybody else. So we've done a shadow paper. It's very balanced and it gives very clear guidance. I'm conscious of time, but that's one of the main things that we really do, not just about supporting the documents and advice line. It's a huge amount of policy and campaigning on landlords' behalf in a very balanced way. And often we're seeing little wins, we're being listened to in some respect. I think we were pleasantly surprised when Michael Gove said something quite positive about landlords not that long ago, talking about how landlords have to have the confidence that they can get their properties back, that ASB has to be dealt with. See that this is like another little heartbeat there, Dawn, isn't it? This confidence level. You see the dip with COVID and the dip again following those mortgage rate rises, the fact that the rental reform looks like it's coming in, EPCs, all of those things. This is from last quarter actually, and I've just seen today we have now got a slightly more recent statistic. So 12% of landlords intending to buy, that was showing 28% wishing to sell. That's a real change in the last few years. It's now 37% saying they're going to sell and 13% looking to buy. And as I say, I think it's, for landlords sometimes it's death by 1,000 cuts, 168 pieces of legislation, constantly changing, having to be a bit like the border force when you have to do right to rent checks and paper and mortgages and tax and not knowing quite what's coming, and that makes it really nerve-wracking. One of the things that we do stress to the government is the absolute key importance that we all play. Labour mobility can only really happen with a vibrant PRS, and lots of people don't want to buy because they do change jobs and they do change locations. They really like renting. It's nice to be able to find somebody else to pay for the boiler rather than having to do that yourself. And so it's really important that if we're going to have a vibrant economy, that we actually have a vibrant PRS, and we do get the feeling that they are starting to understand that. We're not just talking to the current government, we're also talking to the potential Labour government who have a very different approach to rental reform and a very different set of ideologies, scarily so. So we are working on that. I've got it covered here. So some of the other key issues to be aware of, I'm sure you probably do know that with the net zero target, there's been quite some talk for some time about getting all our properties, rental properties up to a C by 2025. That's slipped to 2026. We believe that's probably slipped to 2028, but I haven't had that in writing anywhere, so I'm not allowed to say that, but that's what it looks like. And again, lots of campaigning going on along there because a cost cap of £10,000 per property on a property that you bought in the valley somewhere compared to somewhere else that's much more expensive. It just doesn't work, and it's how we make our properties a C or above when we've got tenants in them is a really tricky ask. So certainly that's something that's concerning landlords, and I think we have to have it in the back of our head as we look at maintenance, refurbishment and potential investment about whether those properties can be brought up to a C. If anybody's renting in Wales or thinking about buying in Wales, you're certainly going to see lots more properties for sale in Wales because their Rental Reform Act is already in place, Renting Homes Wales, the work over in Wales as well. So I know all about that. So if you've got any queries about that, do get in touch with me because that's really tricky. We've got lots of resources on the NLA website there. And again, very few of our members report being affected by the cladding debacle, which is essentially if you've got a flat, a building over 11 metres that's cladded, it's costing people an awful lot. So hopefully that's nobody in here, but again, we've got some guidance around that, but that's hitting people hard as well. So I just thought I'd do a very quick whistle stop through some of the legislative things that you ought to be aware of. There's a new How to Rent guide that's just come out. I'm sure if you're managed already, all of this is done for you. If you were letting a property, it's one of those key documents that you must serve. and you always need to make sure it's the most recent one, so don't have one downloaded and that you share as a PDF, go to that new one, because anytime there's a legislative change, eventually they get round to updating this as well. So that's that how to rent guide. This is good news. It depends where you invest. So I don't know if you've still got properties in Stoke. Yeah. So Stoke have been really fierce with banding HMO rooms with a band A council tax, but then a street across, no band A council tax per room, and that makes it a really difficult market for landlords, as you can imagine. And actually, there's now a consultation about removing that, so that's good news. I know I had some good news somewhere. Making tax digital, we're counting this as a little win. We've been campaigning in the background there. Initially that was supposed to be in 2025, I think, and that's changed a little bit. So now we need a gross rental income around 30k or above before you've got to use that making tax digital system. So that's coming in the next couple of years, so just something else to be conscious of. And all the things that we have to be conscious of. Fire safety regulations as well, those have just changed, so any HMO landlords, that might be something where you'd want to talk to Dawn about, because you have it's the basic things that you'd be using for your licence, to be honest, so how to escape, don't leave the door propped open, that kind of thing. It's slightly different if your building's 11 metres or 18 metres high, but just something there to be aware of as well. Although I've just seen a legislative change, if you're renting to asylum seekers, none of those licence requirements apply until 2026. Have you seen that? A bit worrying, isn't it? Right to rent, all I can say is that's very complicated, except that it's not. Once you look online, it's not that complicated. It's just not as easy as it was before. There's another little extra role that we have to do there. So if you're having to do that, make sure you check, because that's changed again. Carbon monoxide alarms, they should be in place now anywhere where you've got a gas burning appliance, except for a cooker, unless you're in Wales, and then it's still in the room with a cooker as well. And just be conscious if you've got tenants who might have opened up a fire that was blocked up before, because you would need one there. You can get the little box ticked on your gas safety certificate to show that they're in place as well. That's quite handy. So that's something you need to do. Racing along, because I'm about to run out of time, I think, aren't I? Renting homes, Wales, big changes there. Do get in touch if you need to know more about that. I mentioned building safety. Yes, I did it just in time. Whistle stop, I told you. So, so in the background, behind all the hard work that's going on for landlords, there are people fighting your corner and campaigning on our behalf. And you should remember that 80%, just a bit more, of tenants who are really happy and what a good job we're doing for them. Take some comfort from that in the difficult times that there are. So thank you very much, and I hope it wasn't too fast. Thank you.